So welcome everyone. I'm Siobhan from SCVO, the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our talk for Digital Leaders Week. And I'm delighted to introduce our Digital Evolution Manager, John Fitzgerald. And he will be talking about the rapid digital evolution we've seen in charities across Scotland in this most remarkable year. So John, over to you.
Thank you very much, Siobhan, and thank you all for taking the time to join us. As I said, I'll talk for about 20 minutes, but then have quite a bit of time for Q&A at the end, so we can dig into a few more topics. But just to get us started, I wondered if we could do a quick reflection exercise in chat. So if you want to think about what's been the most unexpected change you've seen during lockdown in the last 6 months, is something maybe that you've changed about the way you work or something like that. If you want to just think about that and pop that in chat, that would be great. Okay, yeah, Jane's flagged working incredibly hard, and I'm sure that's common for so many people. Okay, that chat's open. So, oh, great, a few more answers have popped in. And adapting has felt very natural in a lot of cases. So that's been really interesting. It's really interesting themes to start with. The way we'll do the call, as Siobhan said, is we'll stay muted mostly, but please do at any point put questions into chat and then we'll pick them up at the end. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about how we catalyze digital evolution during COVID-19. And my kind of headline for it is half a decade in a week. And we'll see a bit more detail about that shortly. So we've actually been supporting the voluntary sector to evolve digitally for over 5 years. And for a lot of that time, it's been a long-term and incremental process. And if you asked me in 2018, why do you call it digital evolution rather than digital transformation? I would probably have pointed you towards this graphic that I made. And on this is an attempt to kind of summarize the various stages we saw charities going through in their digital journey. So right in the bottom left, a charity might have no contact with technology, no real idea what it could offer them. Then at the very bottom, we've got the dinosaurs who are maybe coming to us with particular problems or pain points in their technology. Then we see charities that are called the amphibians, and these are ones that are maybe making their way into a new digital environment, but they're not quite sure how to make the best of it. We then see the digital chimps who are adapting their working practices, but maybe in a quite peripheral way. They're just dabbling a wee bit. And then I think for me, the real change started to happen when you see organizations using digital tools to make very brand new services in ways they couldn't do it before. And a lot of charities I work with were sitting just somewhere in the middle here. And for me, a big question pre-pandemic was what kind of incentives or drivers are there to help charities move along this spectrum more quickly? Because for a lot of organizations, they had a lot of constraints and challenges to battle with. So why would they take extra time to adopt digital tools? And in response to this kind of spectrum of needs, SCDO over several years has developed an ecosystem of digital support. It's on our website at scdo.org.uk/digital. And there's various different support offers and training offers that we've built up over a long period. I'm going to highlight a couple of the most important ones to give a flavour of what we do in practice. So we have a digital checkup, which is at digitalcheckup.org. And this is an online self-assessment that charities can take, and it gives them a holistic picture of where they're strong and where they're weak in terms of their digital capability. And over a couple of years, about 300 charities have done that. And 100 of those charities have gone on to do an in-depth conversation with us to help them move further on their digital journey. But this is a very excellent entry point into exploring your digital capability. A second piece that we offer is a senior leaders program, and that's an in-depth 6-month action learning set where senior leaders come together in a small group and explore digital. And the basic premise behind this is that we're not trying to turn CEOs into technical experts, but we are trying to turn them into confident advocates of digital. So a CEO who does this program should leave it feeling empowered to go away and make their team make faster progress with digital channels. And that's been going on through the pandemic. That's why our current kind of headline for it is navigating the next normal. And at the moment it's online, but it has been face-to-face in the past, and it's reached about 150 charity leaders over several years. So it feels almost impossible to imagine January, February 2020 now. I was thinking back as I was writing this talk and thinking, well, what was happening back in February? Well, back in February, we had the Gathering, which is the annual expo for all charities in Scotland, a face-to-face event, which feels like a very nostalgic thing now. And at that event, we were laying out plans for our work as part of the Catalyst. And the Catalyst is a UK-wide collaboration amongst funders and all kinds of different charity partners to basically drive the sector forward and make more use of digital more quickly. And if you were to ask me at that point, what does the Catalyst mean? I would have said it probably means reaching more charities more quickly and scaling up quite a bit, driving that forward. But it's probably not doing something radically different. It's not a big change of direction. It's a sort of situation where the future more or less resembles the past. And then, of course, just a month later, the pandemic and associated public health measures struck, and we were in a totally different environment. And for me, this was a moment where it was like launch the digital lifeboats is the metaphor I would use to describe it, where instead of doing incremental, gradual progress, charities suddenly had to take really urgent action, because if they didn't do that, they wouldn't be able to make any contact with their beneficiaries or carry on their activity. So it was a kind of overnight change for the whole sector. And for us at SCVO, this gave us an immediate focus, which was about how do we reach a lot of people very quickly with advice they can easily put into action. And as I said in the title of this talk, I talked about half a decade in a week. I'd like to put that in slightly more concrete terms so you can imagine what it would have been like for a small charity trying to find its way in late March, early April this year. So on Monday, you might have set up a virtual phone exchange so that your switchboard diverted through to your staff's mobile phones at home. On Tuesday, you might have enabled team chat and video calling so your team could collaborate to some extent. On Wednesday, it might have been about making sure you're well set up with cloud-based file storage and document editing, something like Office 365 or Google G Suite. Thursday might have been a time to look at external video meetings, so you could run group activity and meetings online. And then maybe Friday, if you had a bit of spare time left in the week, you could look at turning a website inquiry form into a website chat and mobile-friendly forums. So that's a bit of a composite example, but there were charities who were coming back to me, having done one set of things one week, they wanted to know something very different the next week. So it was an incredible pace of change. And really our role moved from a kind of pushing the sector ahead in quite a gradual way to kind of having to move very fast to keep up. So there were several partners involved in this work. So SCVO, our digital team, we already had a plan for this work, so we were there ready to do it, but we partnered with Third Sector Lab to give us some much needed extra capacity and reach. And they're very active on Twitter if you look them up. And the Tech for Good Live team also did some great work for us in making a podcast available so we could reach a much bigger audience. So I'm now going to do a few slides to summarize what we did in terms of activity, how do we support all these charities on that very rapid journey. So in March and April, we began our DigiShift Zoom calls. So these were live Q&A calls with a few experts and a lot of discussion and a lot of peer-to-peer support. And we ended up doing about 2 of those per week and reaching 2,200 people. We also switched our digital health check to a more crisis-driven one-to-one support service. So That meant people could just pick up a 15-minute call straight away. We started running lots and lots of blogs. So as we got asked questions on phone calls or Zoom chats, we would then put together answers. So in a blog, people could use links and so on to make progress at their own pace. I just want to kind of highlight what an interesting time it was in early April. So we're all kind of digital type people. So if you would ask us a year ago, had we heard of the word Zoom bombing? The answer is probably not. But that obviously became a worldwide concern in early April. We got Zoom bombed on one call that we did and then had to switch overnight to a registration system. So it's interesting to kind of crystallize how quickly things were changing and moving for the whole sector all at the same time. In May and June, we began thinking about how we're going to make our content available more widely. So we're aware that if you were an organization that wasn't able to get onto the live DigiShift call, you might want to hear about it later. So a podcast was our quick response to that. And so that's available online as well. And as our blogs began to get longer and longer, we started developing how-to guides. So these are more detailed, structured guides to help charities make progress across bigger topics. And then finally, in July and August, we partnered with Third Sector Lab because they were running a big series of training sessions. We contributed 5 sessions from SCVO, and I think overall there were 23. And the 23 training sessions reached 1,300 people overall. So they're just short 90-minute sessions across a really broad range of digital topics. And we were amazed at how strong the demand was for those, because this was a time where you might assume that everybody was really, really busy, working hard and trying to keep the plates spinning, but actually there was a real need for training as well. So what did we learn in this kind of whirlwind 5 months? Well, I think for me, the absolute top lesson was that charities of all sizes have a huge amount of confidence and agility. So even really small organizations with very few resources were able to just jump on board and get moving very quickly. But a lot of people circled around the same basic questions. So one classic example of this would be privacy and Zoom. So it was a hot topic, but then even at quite late calls, in the late summer, people were still asking the same questions that people had been asking in late April. So hence the need to get content online at the same time as doing the live calls as well. We felt that organizations made really rapid progress. So as I said, that kind of example of making half a decade's progress in a week is there, but it was focused on quite easy wins. So charities were using off-the-shelf commodity technology. They weren't taking the time to design and build brand new stuff from scratch. We could see that people really wanted to get advice from us directly. So particularly on the 15-minute calls that I did, in many cases, charities could have resolved those queries with some clever Google searching in their own right, but they actually needed to get it, directly from a trusted source, which was SCVO. A colleague in the summer had the interesting reflection that, they were keeping very in touch with what's the cutting edge thinking about remote working or service design. And what was really interesting is that our key messages were staying very up to date and very relevant, but at the same time, they were landing very well with charities. So even organizations that were quite naive in digital terms, they could make sense of the insights that we were sharing with them. So things have changed quite a bit now. So we've had that 5 or 6 months of learning something on a daily or weekly basis, but organizations are now starting to catch their breath a little bit. And I've kind of labeled this period the finding your own way stage. So our key focus now has shifted to how can we get to a sustainable ecosystem that people can use to learn and grow at their own pace. And if you wanted to put that into a user needs statement, you might say, as a charity working to embed digital services or systems, I want support so we build things that work for everyone for the long term. So instead of a kind of ad hoc quick fix, you're looking for something you can roll out as a more universal service and support in an ongoing way. So what kind of key themes and trends are we expecting to see in the next while? I think first of all, the primary concern is organizations need to turn digital duct tape, so those ad hoc solutions, into something that's stable and resilient so they can consolidate and embed it for the long term. So they want to make sure that their data is being properly looked after, that lots of people across the team understand how it works, that they've got long-term support as well. And that means that now is a time for investment and commitment decisions. So it could be something as simple as moving from a free tier of a product to something that's paid for, or it could be training people in their staff team, or even thinking about where their staff resource sits. So if a new digital channel has become very popular, that might mean their organization needs to be a different shape. But it's also going to mean that charities are starting to approach external funders and say, we need some extra capacity to develop a new service, a new way of working. And what that means is organizations are going to need to have some way of evaluating what's worked. So first of all, they want to know internally, we've had that warm glow of satisfaction that we could make something and some users came and used it, but they want a deeper understanding of was this really an effective way of delivering a service and what might we need to do further to refine it. But the other side of evaluation is so that organizations can go out to funders and say, here's a case for support for this new service. Can you help us scale it so it's sustainable for the long term? I think one unfortunate point is that this embedding and committing work is going to be happening against a harder, not an easier context. So unfortunately, it's not a situation where charities can sit back and say, let's take a long time to decide about this, or we've got lots of extra resource, we can choose where to put it. It's one where they're going to have to make tough choices. So what kind of tools are we going to offer charities in this next phase? Well, some of the core things that we've done before are going to stay there. So that's the DigiShift goals, which will now become monthly. We'll still keep doing blogs and the one-to-one support, but we're going to introduce some new elements. And I think a key component is an email journey so that people that have engaged with some of our events or real-time products can then be in contact with us and see what other resources are out there. So we're looking at using email as a way of encouraging people through their digital journey. And the Catalyst, this UK-wide initiative I mentioned before, has a great resource called Service Recipes. So we'll be making use of that, where charities can look at an end-to-end use case of how another organization has solved a problem and see what technologies they made use of to do that. SCVO has always done training of one form or another. So we're going to add to that and increase the range of topics we've got available, particularly because we saw that the Curve training was a very successful initiative. And we're also looking at working with groups of charities at the same time. So where similar types of organizations have similar problems, we can work with them on common solutions, which can often make it more feasible for charities to develop new services. So I'm going to wrap up in a minute, but I want to reflect now on what questions we've been testing or we hope to test in the next phase. So first of all, I think the biggest question will be about how self-directed or email support might work if it's automated. Will that be compelling enough? And related to that, a second question is about, will people miss the live hand-holding that they had? So that's not to kind of demean charities, but I think because they were entering such uncharted waters, the fact that they had expert voices to hear and to ask questions of was a real source of moral support. For us, in terms of content, I think we're going to have some choices about the balance between core definitive messaging and a wider landscape of what ifs. So one example of core definitive messaging would be cybersecurity, where you can point to quite concrete guidance and say, go and take these 10 actions and you will absolutely be in a better place with regard to your cyber resilience. But once a charity moves on in its digital journey, it becomes more sophisticated. So it's not a kind of black and white, just do this, don't do that. There's lots of shades of nuance that charities might want to explore. So that's a whole different level of guidance there, and you might pitch it in a different way as well. for me, a kind of core concern that runs through all of this work all the time is how can we signpost really efficiently? So a lot of what we do is really about connecting the third sector with insight that's out there in the private sector or other spheres. So we want to do it really efficiently so that people get the advice they need as quickly as possible, and also that we can help as many organizations as possible in a short time frame. So thanks very much for listening. I know that was kind of 20 minutes of non-stop talking. I'd like to now just open it up for some questions. So I'm going to have a look at chat and see what people were thinking about as I was talking. But I'll give you a minute or two to kind of digest thoughts and chip in some thoughts. But so no questions are coming yet. But I'm going to ask a question of the room to kind of get things rolling. I wonder if any of you have been involved or close to the third sector or charities and seen anything you thought, wow, that was a sign of really rapid progress. Okay, I'm assuming that chat's working and with us, right? So Jane's got a question about hybrid ways with online and face-to-face. That's a really interesting question. Actually, I have a friend who works in an organization where they run a physical building, which used to run meetings for hire. And one thing they've been working on over the summer has been kitting that out with AV equipment so that they can have a small number of people in a big room, but then also live stream it as well. Their initial focus has been on the kind of bricks and mortar technical aspects, but I think one thing they're going to need to look at in the next phase will be, if you're running an interactive meeting like that, what are the extra things you need to think about? Because if somebody's joining a meeting remotely, it may be harder for them to speak up with a question.
So that was quite similar to what Manchester Citizens Advice were talking about doing. So they were very much aware that some of their service users were digitally excluded, so couldn't necessarily join a Zoom call or something to interact with advisors. So they're setting up almost like digital booths in some of their offices so that people can come in to have a remote meeting with an advisor, but to not have to have their own tech. And then obviously for Corona, that can easily be wiped down after they've been. So it was all about making their service inclusive and giving everyone that opportunity to access any digital that they needed.
Thank you. That's a good example, Siobhan. Any other questions about anything that I was covering? Oh, got a new message in the chat. Yeah, so Jim, that was a good one about local TSIs. So if you're not in Scotland, a TSI is like a local umbrella body of charities in a particular local authority. Do you want to give a quick example, Jim, from that about something you saw locally that was impressive?
Hi, John. We
Hi, Jim.
did some work locally, and so I work for the Boys Brigade in Glasgow, but my local interface is in Kirkintilloch, and my work during furlough was with the Milton of Campsie group supporting Lennoxtown and Torrance, but it was very quickly reorganised to a wider G66, which was more the sort of geographic area of East Dunbartonshire.
Yeah.
But it was interesting to see how some people didn't have skills at the start.
Yeah.
And then as the sort of probably the weeks and months progressed, some of the models being used by one or two of the local community initiatives were sort of piggybacked by the other ones, using things like Trello as an option to make sure requests were being handled properly. And I was using a lot of things that I had found out from the digital leaders, work 3 years ago, 2018, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So I felt it was quite switched on, but it was good to be able to sort of, cascade that information down locally.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a really strong theme right through, is kind of organizations helping each other. And I think for me, that was a very encouraging thing, was that because you could see very small organizations making progress, that was a real source of encouragement, because quite often you had that mindset of, oh, well, we could progress digitally, but not really, because we're too small in terms of budget or capacity. So yeah, that was a good positive thing that we saw. I wonder if, I mean, I obviously in my chat there kind of fired out a few ideas about where I thought things might be heading next. I wonder if anybody else had any thoughts or reflections about where they think the voluntary sector or charities might be moving in terms of access. Yeah, and Samantha, you made a really good point about inclusion. You know, it's so easy to switch on a digital service, and one kind of theme that we kept hammering home through our DigiShift calls was about making sure, you know, let's imagine you've got 30 people regularly active on a new online service. Make sure you check the wider group of people that you're in touch with before. And we know some organizations were doing this, say, by allocating a time each week to just bring round people. So that's quite old technology, just picking up the phone, but is a way of just checking whether they'd like to try an online channel, or if there's other barriers they're experiencing, to make sure that they weren't slipping through the cracks. Yeah, so Siobhan's just posted about an example on our site called Weekday Wow Factor, which is a very inspiring example where they work with older people on a kind of dance class, which they used to do face to face. And that group didn't necessarily have a very in-depth digital skill set, but they started with WhatsApp video and then moved from there to Zoom as a more capable platform. But what was really interesting was they started with what people had and kind of built confidence as they went along. So it's a very positive example. I'm just wondering if there's any other questions. I mean, we were expected to run up until about 22, but we can always finish a little bit early if people want to do that. I'm assuming that what I covered was reasonably clear and useful. But if you've got any other questions, feel free. All right. Okay, well, thanks very much. And I hope you all have a good rest of your Digital Leaders Week. Yes, something that Siobhan has just reminded me of is Alison Stone, our Cyber Resilience Coordinator, is giving a talk tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. So you can book that on the website. And thanks again for your time, and I'll see you later.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.